Talking consumer issues, the National Consumer Commission, and protecting you as a consumer, and we're unpacking some of those issues. And just before the break, I raised one area. I mean, the mobile phone industry has changed the way that we communicate and the way that we live our worlds, but it has also come with another side. And the one thing for me that really is a problem is these SMSs that we get, and we get an option to opt out. And I'm just wondering, let's go to our NCC and just find out what is happening. I don't want to be harassed and questioned and be SMS'd and opt out of anything. I don't want to opt in or out. I just want to be left alone. How do we fix this?
The Act allows consumers, actually, it gives consumers the right to privacy. And actually, they've got that opportunity to say that in terms of direct marketing, to block that directed marketing that's directed to me, either through post, telephone, and all that. The Act has set up a curfew for times wherein a consumer should not be contacted. But then we find that now, when you get those SMSs, it's actually your direct marketers, I'm selling you this product and that, and then if you say, you can opt out and all that, it's actually, once you even opt out, it's a cost as a consumer. And then it keeps on coming in, the numbers will actually continuously change. But then what we are looking at is that as a commission now, we are in a process of establishing a register which has to be recognized. And until we get to a point where in the register is fully functional, we still have to, as South Africans, be grappling with the issue of opting out. But then it's a process that will take some time, wherein we would be looking at all these other avenues that we can really preemptively block and register a number and say, I do not want to be contacted. What is actually very difficult for now is that at this stage, we haven't set up a threshold for marketers to register, and also to say, how can we prosecute that? Because if there is a random number that you would send and a person says, I've opted out, it would be very difficult for the Commission just to act on that until we have set up a threshold and say, maybe if this marketer has maybe consulted 500 people and then we say it's direct marketing, then we have set up the rules, it will be easier to prosecute. So it is a process. All that we are asking is for South Africans to be patient, bear with us. It will be an infrastructure that will be costly for us, time-consuming, going through the procurement process just to set it up so that it becomes fully functional to protect the consumers.
Business practices, one of the things that I'm noticing quite a bit online now is that you've got your page, and then right at the bottom, there's a little thing that says, we will offer you this as well, but it's ticked, and you have to untick it, actually. Do you know what I mean? Not to be bombarded with other things. And if you don't know to look for these things, you end up signing up for 101 things. Surely this kind of behavior is the kind of things that we should be fighting against.
Yeah. Negative option marketing and inertia marketing is an unfair business practice. Inertia marketing has been, in terms of regulation that was passed prior to the commencement of the Consumer Protection Act, it was already declared prohibited. So it is not allowed. And consumers must have the choice. Consumers must themselves tick whether they want it or not. They cannot be a tick.
Okay. All right, so they have to beg you, and you must say yes, not the other way around, unticking anymore. Okay, all right, let's get a sense of what's happening on the floor and also what our consumers are saying at home. And we go to Babs on table number 1. If you could just stand up, Babs, and ask your question. Okay.
Thank you. Peter, to the panel, good morning.
Morning.
Just on behalf of consumers, what are consumers' rights when they purchase an appliance, a piece of furniture, and let's assume they use that appliance for a short space of time? In other words, it's found to be defective thereafter. What can consumers do? Are consumers forced, when purchasing this appliance, to also purchase an insurance product? together with the main product itself?
All right. Okay. So, I did a story not so long ago. The furniture industry were really loading charges with these contracts, forcing people to take insurances and all sorts of other things. Is that something that's been on your radar and have looked at to manage? Because the guy just wants a settee and he will just sign, and he ends up actually paying more on these other charges than the actual furniture itself.
Yeah. I think, Peter, what we had to realize is that this happens more often when consumers would actually buy those, not actually using cash, but when you find that it's actually on credit as well. It's your bank charges on the credit itself, and then is this insurance on your life, wherein you actually take a credit insurance on top of that, and you also buy an extended warranty. What the Act looks at is that when you buy a product, it comes in, you have an implied warranty of the 6 months that is already given with you protected as a consumer. But then there is also this other clause within the Act that says that goods should be of good quality within a reasonable product, within a reasonable period. And when you look at that, it's wherein now we'll be looking at the expertise of the Umbas, because now when we say reasonableness, what is reasonable? Because for a chair and maybe for a kettle, the terms will be totally relative. So it's wherein we'll be looking at the expertise and say, what is the industry standards when we're looking at the lifespan of an armchair like this? So it's wherein we still, within the consumer protection, have to get some kind of like, I would say, case law and all that, to get these provisions tested so that we can, with confidence, come back and say, maybe for a chair, maybe for a stove, this is what we are looking at. And this is totally unfair on consumers, really, when you would find that people are being loaded with all this information without them being given an opportunity. But again, also, it looks at us as being gullible, wherein when we are really looking at material items, we tend to overlook some of the other things, like, can I take the contract home? Look at what I have, because if I have a life insurance, why should I be worrying about a 2,000 rand and paying an additional 500 rand just to cover myself on 2,000 rand? So those are the things that I think when we go out there, all of us, to educate consumers and say, what do you really need? What do you understand as a life insurance? What do you understand as an extended warrant? And what the Act says is that even if you have the 6 months implied warranty, what the manufacturers give you, it's also an additional warranty above what you have. So
Okay.
consumers have the protection.
All right. Yeah.
If I may just add, yes, the Act, the Deputy Commissioner has already spoken about the 6 months implied warranty. If a good is not fit for purpose or it breaks within that 6 month period, the consumer is entitled to approach the supplier for either refund, repair, or replacement.
I just want to just add to the aspect around the transaction that involves a credit agreement as well, where you take something on credit. I think we must also be in a position to advise consumers properly. When you take credit or something on credit, there is sometimes a need that you must get insurance. I think what we don't want is where a consumer is abused, where they are actually advised to take a product that is unrelated to what they're actually buying. Like, for instance, taking 2 insurance covers on one particular aspect. That's not good advice. So I think there is a need for a consumer to be informed of exactly what that is and what is it for, so that the consumer can make an informed decision. So just to respond to the question from the floor there, exactly that. When a consumer transacts, he has a right to get the information as simple as possible. If it's a contract, it can be in whatever pages, fine print, but you must explain to the consumer what that means. If there's a cost to that particular product, you must break down to the consumer what this is for,
Okay.
so that the consumer makes an informed decision.
So let me ask you this. We all get very excited with our 13th check, and all we want to do is buy that product.
Yeah.
And I guess this is the difference between, you're not necessarily breaking the law because you're complying with everything, but you know that what you're doing is unethical because the person that's sitting in front of you is just saying, yes, I understand, but you can see that he doesn't. What do we do in situations like that?
Yeah, can I just maybe say exactly that point? Hence I said the success of this is with the traders themselves, the business people that are offering the products and services. Because you also don't, because the Consumer Protection Act is very clear as well. There's prohibition of unconscionable conduct, where you also take advantage of the fact that this person does not even know that. But for every good business person, they know it's in their interest to actually get the consumer to understand what they're transacting on. So the Consumer Protection Act wants to deal severely with people that are unethical. But for normal errors where you thought somebody understood but they didn't understand, I think that is something that can be dealt with and remedied. But those unethical things where people know, where you actually add a lot of charges that you know are incorrect just to make a quick buck, that is what the NCC will be looking very closely at and make sure that they protect consumers against that. But I think businesses do try at all times to actually explain that, but we don't rule out the unscrupulous ones, which is what the Act wants to deal with.
All right. I know that on the floor we have Bonita Hughes with the Consumer Goods and Services Ombud. If I could just ask you to stand, if we can get a microphone to table number 4. And the question I want to ask you is, again, with these rights that consumers have, what are some of the mistakes the consumers are making and that we really need to warn them about today as they walk in to start these transactions?
I think, like the Commissioner said, consumers do have 6 months in which they can return goods. But I think it's also important to notice that in some instances, suppliers just repair goods without giving the consumer the option to a replacement or a refund. So it's important for consumers to know that they can opt for a refund or they can opt for a replacement instead of a repair. So I think that's an important thing that consumers should look out for and know that that is their right.
What to save you receiving a lot of the complaints that you receive, what should we as consumers be doing? Is it educating ourselves? What is it that you think that we should be doing better as consumers?
Yes, I think the most important thing is reading and understanding. Don't haste into something. Make sure that you understand. Ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask. I think, just make sure of the facts before you enter into any agreement or sign anything.
Okay, all right. Cliff Johnson is at table number 8. And I might have a question for him after his question. He's with the Consumer Union. Cliff?
Thank you. My question was actually going to be about the do not contact list, which has somewhat been answered. But related to that, I would like to just raise an issue, and I don't know what the solution to that is. And this is also with these irritating calls that you get on your cell phone from direct marketers. But how many of us have had the situation where the phone rings and you answer it and it's dead? And then shortly after that it rings again, and 3 or 4 times this happens, and then suddenly a direct marketer comes on. Now this is a result of some automatic machine that dials out numbers. And as soon as somebody picks up, it drops all the other calls. And this is highly irritating. I don't know how we're going to deal with it, but it's a relatively recent thing, which I think we need to address. Thank you.
All right, just before you sit down as well, I'm going to get that question answered, but Consumer Union, your job is to help consumers. Who are the biggest culprits at the moment that are facing the largest number of complaints?
Yeah. We monitor the complaints that we get every month, and we sort of take the top of the pops. And at the moment, top of the pops is cell phone charges, cell phone data charges in particular. And in fact, the whole billing system of cell phone companies, where they don't distinguish between what you're paying for the phone and what you're paying for the service. Consumers don't understand it. I think it's quite possibly done deliberately. And we get a lot of complaints when suddenly a consumer is faced with a high charge that they did not expect.
All right, so who can answer this question, the first question, about these automated machines that are just harassing no end?
issue of the automated calls that we have in South Africa for now is that we really, without having the register in place, wherein people will be preemptively blocking those, for now we would not have a mechanism of really going after those people. Because when you start identifying is that we do have numbers that are being spoofed, wherein you will get a 087 number and all that, so it says to us that we have to be communicating with our service providers to really unearth who are those people. And then as well to, sometimes you'd find that some of the call center agents are not even, like on the automated numbers, they are not even originating from the country itself. It's other call centers that are being filtered into South Africa. So we will be sitting with this problem, and we really hope that we will be trying to resolve it when we put the register into place. And on the issues of the billings and all that, I think as the Commission, we really recently has received a number of problems or complaints that have been brought to the Commission on the issues of the contract terms and all that. We are looking into that, and as we said, that we are working with ICASA. We've looked into that matter. We've questions have been raised with the telecoms operators to say, give us answers, what is happening? So we are waiting for that information to come through. They still have up to the end of, up to mid-May for them to respond. And once we have that response to all the questions that have been raised by ICASA with the telecom operators, is then that we'll be able to say, do we really have an issue in terms of the contract terms on the fixed term contracts and the issues of the billing? Do we have an issue around the way in which people are being billed, especially on the issues of roaming? And then sometimes, again, wherein people will subscribe to data unknowingly, and then you continuously get this charge of 10 Rand, 1 Rand every day, and you see that as a telephone call, but actually it's data that you are using every day and you are not even aware. So we have a number of those problems. We are using a bigger approach to say, let us get the information. We know issues that we want to address, and then we are working with the regulator for licensing so that we get that information and start addressing those issues, because they are systemic issues but in a holistic manner.
Mr. Ntuli, what do we do with the informal sector? Because a lot of these suppliers, they're not registered anywhere with anybody, with any kind of institution, and so I will go buy from them because they're cheaper, but I guess I'm opening myself up to all sorts of problems because some of them don't even have an address. They're literally just on the side of the road. How does the CPA work with these kinds of people?
In regard to the informal sector in general, remember that when the sector is informal, it may be that it actually best for it to operate informally like that. If you look at the cost and all of that of formalizing, it might be that it is good. But what is important is that if you are informal, it doesn't mean that you must not comply with the rules. So which means that all of the basic requirements for consumer protection should apply to every business in a way. They must treat consumers fairly. For instance, if you stand on the side of the road, you're selling food, obviously the safety issues come in. And there are bylaws in municipalities that deal with that. The provinces oversee that as well. And that is why then the cooperation between the NCC and those structures are important to ensure that there's compliance across the board. But I think it's important also for consumers when they purchase things to actually make sure that they deal with reputable people. Because then when you deal with reputable structures, reputable entities, then there's better protection. But we do understand that there are some instances where consumers are just not having a choice but to deal with what they have, which is at close proximity. But I think it is important to really say people must comply. If you're selling a product, you must ensure its safety. You must make sure that it doesn't harm the person that you're selling to. But I would leave that to Ms. Mabuza to maybe expand on that, because it's actually an issue that comes increasingly. So as much as we've got issues with the formalized sector, there are issues that are coming from the informal sector which are very important at this point. But the one thing that I also wanted to indicate is that in regards to the problem around cell phone charges and all of that, for instance, we keep saying that the consumer must understand their contract, the consumer must know what is it that they are being charged on. But I think the obligation is more on the company that is doing that. Because the reason why you're wanting to protect the consumer is to exactly recognize the vulnerability, that they are vulnerable already, especially the consumer that cannot read and write. They're already vulnerable. So the law protects them and puts the obligation on the business to actually make sure that they treat the consumer fairly. So in terms of the data charges that are going, out of the way, there's lots of complaints about that. You cannot just say no, but the consumer agreed. They've passed their limit. It's not about that. There are certain limits that you must put to ensure that you protect the consumer as well yourself, so that you don't have any problems going forward.
All right. There's a few questions that are coming through, Mr. Mohamed, and I think at the beginning you talked about standards and setting norms, and I wonder if this kind of falls into that. Figo Arnold says car dealers force you to pay license and registration fees of 5,000 Rand. Is this lawful? It costs under 800 if you do it yourself. Can you be compelled to go through the dealer to license your car, or can you do it yourself? Yeah.
This is actually a service. I think I'll go back to what Ms. Ntuli has said in terms of now when you go there to purchase a vehicle, and understanding what are the line items, your additional costs and all that, the issue of the licensing, it's a service that the supplier or the garage would actually give to you. So normally what should be happening with a proper business is that they should explain to you and say, this is what we offer you as an additional service. It's not really and all that they can do it for you. So they would give you all the papers and allow you to go and do the registration, because now what they will be charging in is the running up and all that and getting that license printed and all that and sticking it in your car and all that. So you have an option, so you are not forced to take up additional costs as add-on because it's a service that you can decline.
All right. And then Sergio Singh says, rental agents and placement fees, is there a maximum that can be charged? I know football agents are now down to 3%. What about rental agents and placement fees? Is there a limit? Is there a norm, or the industry regulates itself?
Yeah. On the issue of pricing, what the Act looks at is that it looks at the fairness of any other service in terms of the fairness in the practice. But then the Act doesn't allow the Commission, that we don't have the jurisdiction to settle on the issues of prices to say this is the price that people would be charging, because it now blares itself into the issues of competition. Because once you start establishing a particular fee, that means you are bringing in the industries to start colluding on what they think is reasonable in terms of charging people. So on the issue of pricing, we do not as a Commission have a jurisdiction to set pricing.
Okay. All right. Let's go to table 6, where we'll find Alistair Tempest. Alistair Tempest is on table number 6.
Thank you very much indeed. Good morning. The American FBI has recently said that South Africa is one of the most vulnerable countries in the world to international criminal spam. What I mean by that is people who come with, for example, a message on your email, or more and more often SMSs, which then puts, for example, a virus in your machine, which will take away all your private data, logins and things like that. Now, this is a new threat to us here in South Africa. What is the plan, or is there a plan from the NCC to educate consumers and a strategy to try and protect South African consumers from this really very serious new threat that we are facing? Thank you.
Okay. Education.
Yeah. The Commission is aware of the problem. The Deputy Commissioner might be able to speak more about the organization that we have just joined, an international organization that looks at all of these spam issues. She attended a conference in Tokyo recently about it. Maybe I should leave it to her to respond.
As South Africa, we are aware of those problems and some of the inroads that we can make. We have recently joined the London Action Group in working with other international companies in really understanding the threat, especially within their cyberspace. And looking at South Africans, that when we look at the Africa as a continent, is that we have the highest number of IP addresses that are being spoofed, and then in terms of the phishing as well, is that when you look at South Africans, we tend to transact over the internet, either using our smart devices or our computers and all that. That makes us to be vulnerable because we are not even aware of the firewalls that we have to be putting in. We're not aware of what is it that we can be giving and all that. So it will be a drive that as the Commission now working up and setting up the register itself and working with some of our counterparts in learning from them in terms of understanding the issue of the spams and what is it that consumers can do, is that we will come up vigorously maybe towards the end of the year or maybe hopefully next year, coming up with a better strategy that is coherent. And looking into that is that we also have the POPI, which is the protection of personal information, that we still have to look at and say, what is it that South African companies that are dealing with people's data are supposed to be looking at? And I think it will be our engagement with the Department of Justice, because we see the relationship that we have the protection of personal information, where in companies that collect data have to ensure that that information is protected. But then we also have the issue of the Electronics Communication Act, where already people have opted out to try and merge all these pieces of legislation and afford consumers the best protection that we would have. It will be a journey as South Africa for us to start putting up all these mechanisms in place, but though it will be tedious, but we will get there. We just hope that we should be patient and just work as fast as we could to afford South Africans the protection they need.
Okay, you want to add?
Yes, I just want to say that the issue around information is actually bigger, in a sense that there's a lot of fraud that takes place through the cyberspace. And because consumers are not aware, they fall, to that trap. I think the issue about education and awareness raising, basically warning consumers about that, would be very effective, but it needs to be coordinated. The NCC must obviously work with the other agencies, whether agencies that fall within the Department of Communications, ICASA and all of this, so that they can actually come up with a strategy to just warn consumers on these things. Because you see, on those types of issues, a consumer is sitting in their own space. You are not there to warn them. It's not like when they walk into a shop and then you say you must explain to them a contract and all of that. They are in their own space. That's the challenge that we're currently facing, even with internet gambling, where internet gambling, online gambling is illegal in South Africa. But then people in their own private spaces get into those sites and then they start playing, and then they are not protected at all. So we're saying that there should be a mechanism, obviously, and as government we are looking at a mechanism also to detect those types of illegal sites where consumers are actually encouraged to come in and be robbed by these unscrupulous entities. Thanks.
All right. So at table number 4, we're going to find Sue Meirdal, and you're with the Ombud for long-term insurance. Sue?
Good morning. I would like to know something about the procedure that you use when you investigate complaints. And the other question I had was, are you a member of the Ombudsman Association of South Africa, or might you consider becoming a member? We'd be interested to know.
Okay, so let's start with the easy one first. Are you a member of the Ombudsman Association of South Africa, and would you consider it if you're not? Commissioner? Are you a member of the Ombudsman Association of South Africa?
The National Consumer Commission today is not a member of the Ombudsman Association of South Africa. We haven't been invited to be a member. We'd like to learn more about the Ombuds Association of South Africa before we consider joining it.
All right, okay. And I'm going to ask a back end to that one, but the other one was, what processes do you follow in dealing with complaints? So, again, it's trying to figure out, as a consumer, I hear there's an ombud on insurance, there's an ombud on consumer, there's an ombud on credit, and now there's the NCC. What do I do? Where do I start? How do I survive all of this?
I think from the Commission side, Peter, is that when we get a complaint, first of all, it will be the issue of jurisdiction. In most cases, is that some consumers would not even be aware that when they are not happy at the shop level, where else to go. They would normally direct it and like, okay, there's a National Consumer Commission. The supplier, if the supplier and the complainant, they are in the same province, what the Commission will do is they will refer that complaint to a province to deal with it, because what we have realized is that consumers are not interested in this tedious process of protracted investigations and all that. All they want is, my iron is broken and then I want it fixed. And then, oh, this is what had happened, I want it corrected. So then we will refer it to either the supplier or the province to deal with it, or in this instance, depending on whether we have a dedicated ombuds, we'll refer it to the ombuds. What the ombuds will do, they will investigate the complaint, conciliate and all that, and then when they feel that the matter is in a stage where it needs adjudication, they will still refer the matter back to us, because we are the ones with the investigative powers. Then we will investigate the matter and see if maybe there are any of the provisions, look at the prospects of winning the case, or whether we want to establish case law in it. And once we have investigated, then we will apply, make an application to the National Consumer Tribunal, or maybe to a court, consumer court in this instance, where it will get the matter to be adjudicated upon, and then we can get a decision made whether, because in this instance we'll be looking at the impact that the complaint will have on the bigger society, or whether it's systemic, where it would like to declare a particular conduct prohibited. So we have this to and fro in terms of cooperation, where the complaints come in, the jurisdiction comes in, where is the matter, do we have an adjudicator on board? So it's in most cases is that whatever entry the consumer would use, for us it's important. Any of us, either it's a province or it's an ombuds, we have that mechanism of referring amongst ourselves.
All right, so if I'm reading you correctly, what you're looking at is behaviors, systems, procedures, standards, norms, rather than dealing with individual complaints. And I'm just wondering then, are you working with the various ombuds who don't, so the consumer doesn't even come to the NCC to pick up some of those systemic issues?
Yes, we do. In most cases, you would find that when an ombuds, let's say maybe the financial services ombuds, they are looking at a conduct by maybe something that they would pick up, like maybe it's a pyramid scheme and all that. They will be looking at that conduct and saying, okay, from us, we have investigated and all that. We feel that the best or the best regulator to deal with it will be the NCC. Then they will refer the matter to us. Even from our side, when you would realize that this is a matter, like the Act says to us, let's say on the very same issue about the cell phones and the contract terms, is that when you look at that, we have a regulator, which is ICASA, on point, that is responsible for that sector. Before we even go there to talk directly to the business, we will talk to the sector regulator and say, this is what we are looking at. We cooperate amongst ourselves and say, would you please assist us in this? So we cooperate amongst ourselves to get the best. So we're looking at systemic issues that will have an impact to the broader community, and especially when we look at principles like your unfair contract terms, we're looking at provisions that are being violated by the market itself, so that we get the market to change its conduct. So if a complaint is just minor, like the issue of rounding off, it's a principle that we think it impacts on a number of people who will pick on that complaint but not really address it directly, but look at the impact it has in the broader society.
All right, so we're going to take another quick commercial break, and then when we come back, we'll continue our conversation. We're inside the last half an hour, so if you've got questions, please tweet them at Morning Live SABC, hashtag TNA BizBrief, and we'll get those questions through to the Commissioner, Deputy, and also from the Deputy DG. Get your issues cleared up today. This is your opportunity. We'll see you after this.